I do wonder, however, what would have been like if Michael Bay directed a Medieval Knights movie. Never mind. Hey guys, David here. Big proponents of my channel would know that I was bound to see this movie. This is where my channel started off with, back when it was called Black Spider David. On that other channel, I was talking about Spider-Man and Transformers. Those were like the two biggest things on that channel, from the figures to the movies, etc. So, obviously, 10 years later, I am going to catch up with the 5th installment of Transformers, for better or for worse than worst. And here I am to finally talk about it. And, oh my god, this is probably going to be one of the most difficult reviews to kind of get through. Hopefully, this is not spoiling already my opinions about the film, but this movie made me feel exhausted. Exhausted enough and winded enough to almost not want to do the review, but I feel like it's my civic duty to tell you guys what this is all about. And this is coming from somebody who gives this franchise the benefit of the doubt by saying that I thoroughly enjoy the first movie. The first movie is good to me, and I say good in the sense that it's a very decent and fun and enjoyable popcorn flick. Like, that's a movie that feels composed together, straightforward, even with its silly moments involving the parents or whatever. There's something about that first movie that is charming and endearing and that I can almost watch every time that it's on. It was on one time at work and I watched clips of it, and I feel almost kind of bad because there were moments where I was almost kind of faltering my job a little bit because I was kind of distracted watching certain scenes on the TV at work. That's how much I actually do enjoy the first movie. So you can't say that, oh, I just don't like these movies, I don't like Transformers. I've always loved the concept of Transformers, the action figures themselves, despite the whole idea and mythology behind these characters being created solely to sell the toys. I still enjoy the toys, and I still like these characters, and I still love the mythology and the whole legacy that they left behind ever since the 1980s. With that said, Transformers: The Last Knight is quite possibly one of the worst movies of the year so far. I want to love it. I want to love it, but I just can't. I feel like a battered wife. So, spoilers for Transformers Age of Extinction if you haven't already seen that movie, though you have been given a proper amount of time because it's actually been 3 years since the last one. We space these movies out, and yet they don't take the time to kind of fix what is broken. How that comes about, it baffles me. But in the last one, Optimus Prime left Earth to find his creators and to try to kind of fix everything, hopefully by that point. Here, we catch up with what Optimus has been doing, and suddenly he comes back to Earth with a completely different mindset. All the while, the Decepticons are after Kate Yeager, played by Mark Wahlberg, and whoever he is involved with, tracking down this talisman that trails back all the way to the times of the medieval knights and the Knights of the Round Table, involving King Arthur. And as much as I continued to explain the plot for this movie, the more I start to realize that that's probably one of the biggest problems with the movies, that it tries to take something that not only have we seen before in other movies, but also the Transformers movies themselves, where there's this big MacGuffin. In the first one it was the cube, in the second one it was the shot of the cube, in the third one I can't even remember what the thing was in the third one. It was at the tip of my tongue. I don't know, I can't remember. But then 4 we had in the second one we had the Matrix of leadership. We had the Matrix of leadership. Can't remember what was in the third one. The fourth one was the Dinobots, as well as the Transformium, the Element, whatever the fuck. And now here we got the staff. And even though it's recycled, that by itself could have been interesting. But then they started to flesh it out in the wrong way. I always want stories to kind of flesh out themselves properly, with fleshing out the characters and all that stuff. I always talk about that in my movie reviews. Here, they do it in the completely wrong way, where shit gets convoluted fast, to where 10 minutes into the movie I noticed a plot hole in the movie. And you can kind of make arguments for it, but it's a plot hole involving the English language that they mentioned in the first movie, and now here they start talking English. The Transformers are talking English even back in the medieval days. I'm trying to ignore these things as the movie continues on, but then it just gets plagued with much more pacing problems, bad dialogue, and then the traditional Michael Bay-isms, not only with that Michael Bay is also responsible for, but also with the screenwriters. I don't know what it is, but they have the completely wrong concept of what humor is. Because many people, you probably heard already, people mention that this movie is riddled with awkward humor. The awkward humor is like what a 4th grader's interpretation of humor is, and that's sprinkled throughout the entire movie, where it's like people yelling at each other, or you got an old man saying bitch or hell, or cussing out because, hey look, he's old, so him cussing, it should be funny. It's not. It's not. There is a level of humor. There's something about humor that you need to get right, whether it be with the timing or with the cleverness, and this movie has none of that when it comes to its humor. So, okay. Obviously, with the Transformers movie, I'm not looking for a deep story, I'm not looking for deep characters, and that's not to be found anywhere here, but there's gotta be some redeeming qualities, right? There's gotta be something that I can kind of take away from this movie. Well, two things that come right to my mind when it comes to positive pros about the movies. That one, there's a couple of neat things ever so often that the Transformers do that is actually rather cool. One involving Bumblebee that sure kind of reminded me a little bit of the Iron Giant, but it was cool to see on-screen live action format, and with it being Bumblebee taking on these bad guys with that little trick that he had up his sleeve was rather cool. And then we also got the lead actress, not the little girl, I'll get to her in a second, but the lead actress who obviously being in a Michael Bay movie, she looks like a Victoria's Secret model. However, this Victoria's Secret looking model, or Victoria's Secret model looking actress, can actually kind of act. She's actually not that bad. She was actually charming and worked with what she has. Sure, again, she's got bad dialogue. She doesn't have a really good background. I mean, it almost feels like Michael Bay was forced to change her character to a professor of some kind because of the times that we live in now. It's not 2007 anymore. So, but I can guarantee, I can personally say that she is not a Megan Fox. She's not a Rosie Huntington-Whiteley. She's not even the daughter from the last one. She's actually a genuinely good actress that sold the character and actually makes me want to see her more, even though chances are we won't. But I wouldn't mind seeing her in another movie. And yeah, that's when my pros kind of stopped, because the more I tried thinking about this movie overnight since I last saw it, I couldn't find anything much more redeeming about it. As hard as I tried, I'm trying, guys, I'm trying, because this is the Transformers franchise, and just the more I thought about it, the more the movie began to bother me, because aside from the scripting issues, which are bound to be there in a Transformers movie, I thought, okay, maybe there's some cool action, some cool Autobots, you know, little characters that I enjoy and make the thing kind of go by fast. This movie is shorter, significantly shorter than the last one. The last one was teetering on 3 hours. This one is just a couple minutes shy of 2.5 hours, and yet it still felt the same running time. I still felt like it was 3 hours. And when your movie is significantly shorter than the last one, and yet it still feels just as long, if not longer than the last one, then you're doing something wrong. And not only with the pacing that's kind of all over the place, but then some... the best way that I can summarize it is that this movie felt, and I posted this on my Twitter and on my Facebook, because I feel like this is kind of emblematic of the movie and how potentially saturated we are with these blockbuster big CGI slogfests that we have coming out almost every other week. And that is that this movie felt like the Mass Effect Andromeda of the entire Transformers series, where it felt unpolished and unfinished and just shit out into the theater. Because aside from the scripting issues, there was no significant action that really captured my mind. There was not a single action sequence that I looked at and go, wow, I would love to rewatch that on YouTube. There was none. It's just a bunch of explosions that you would expect from Michael Bay, but none of them felt even inspired by him. He's able to work the choreography or whatever, but there was never something distinctful that made me go, holy shit, that was a crazy action sequence. It just felt like action just happening. And nothing really made it stand out and unique. Nothing about that stood out from like the first Transformers movie with the Scorponok attack or the opening blackout scene with the helicopter. Nothing like that stood out in this movie with the action. And the same could be said for our fellow Transformers, whether it be from the Autobots with Optimus, Bumblebee, except for that little trick that he did that I mentioned, or the Decepticons. There's nothing that stands out about them. In fact, actually a couple of things stood out about them in the negative way, whether it be scenes that were ripping off from other movies. There's one that, without spoiling it, completely ripped off Suicide Squad, and I'm like, guys, if you're gonna borrow from a movie, borrow from a good one, please. Don't do Suicide Squad. Don't. What are you doing? It's like Michael Bay just recently watched Suicide Squad and it's like, ha, I like that, I wanna do that. And Paramount's like, yeah, that movie was not critically well received. I don't give a fuck. I want to do it. And then again, continuing to be emblematic about how many of these movies we're getting almost per month. The CGI in this movie is really not that great. I don't know, how does the CGI get worse from the first movie that came out 10 years ago? The effects in the first movie I still think were robbed of a Best Visual Effects Oscar that year. They went to talking polar bears from the Golden Compass. Yet here I'm like, oh my god, I would not be surprised if they don't even get nominated at all, because there were so many bad CG shots where the CG is just too sharp and crisp, and you know, it moves in a jarring kind of way where it just stands out from the shot. And there's so many shots where I can kind of, in my mind, visualize the robots not being there. And that's a problem when you're designing visual effects. And the reason why I mentioned that being an effect about how saturated we are with big blockbuster movies is because so many of these are coming out that the effects house behind this, ILM, are the ones that are getting kind of poached to do all these effects for these movies, but they don't have the time because we literally have a big blockbuster like this coming out every week, so they kind of downsize and they kind of thin out their effects team, and they don't have the proper time to work on these movies, and because of that we get rushed out effects like we did in this movie where we have a character push a robot head, a human character pushes a robot head with their bare hands, and they move it like it's a pillow. I could have sworn to God, I'm like, I did a double take, like, did I just see that right? And somewhere along the way, I feel like Paramount heard, at the very last second, heard the complaints from the last one being way too long, and they cut this movie down at the last second. Like, Michael Bay intended this thing to be 3 fucking hours, and at the last second, they cut out a whole 30 minutes of footage. And usually, you can kind of get away with that, but this movie, being 2.5 hours, it did the phenomenon. It committed the phenomenon that I didn't think was possible and made it feel both rushed and slow at the same time. How the fuck does that happen? So many scenes we would find either a transformer or a human character literally jump from one place to another in a cut. And I'm like, did I just black out or something? Because I feel like something humongous is missing here, and scenes are just kind of slapped together. And when the hell did Michael Bay turn into Baz Luhrmann where no shot lasts longer than like 15-20 seconds? It's just cropping, cutting. And because of that, you lose the characters, any kind of development that you were intending to have there, and also the action scenes, and it just feels like this. It's like when you kind of rig your eyes like this after coming out of the shower or just waking up, and you see those little bits in your eyes. That's kind of what you see on screen. And don't even get me started on how they take some classic mythology about the Transformers, particularly from the 1986 Transformers the movie, and possibly just completely butchered it. And thankfully, I'm not that attached to that movie. I'm mostly in the 90s side with Beast Wars and whatnot. But for those of you who are and grew up with that original 1980s Transformers cartoon and movie, I feel bad for you. I do not blame you whatsoever if you get pissed off by the end of this movie, because they do some shit that I looked at and went, that I was squinting and I'm like, wait, what? I wasn't that attached to that movie, but even I kind of know what the gist is about these characters and about these robots and what they come from and this whole deal, and yet here it's twisted in a way where, oh my god, I really do hope that this last movie, even though the ending kind of foreshadows it not being so, but here's to hoping that if they do continue, it's time for Michael Bay to go, because I'm going to end the review with a devil's advocate kind of angle by saying that maybe Michael Bay is making these movies bad on purpose because he genuinely wants out. He genuinely wants Paramount to kind of be like, okay dude, it's time to go, because if it wasn't for the past 5 years where every time he makes a Transformers movie it's shit, but then in between he makes actually kind of good movies, from Pain and Gain to 13 Hours, I think that's a testament to say that Michael Bay does have the potential of being a good director when he's not bogged down by the contracts that is the Transformers franchise. I feel like this guy can be a generally great powerhouse behind the camera with almost like his own genre that those movies were, like Pain and Gain, where he mixes humor with a little bit of drama and his own kind of style to it. And he can be a good director. It's just that when he has to do shit with the Transformers these days, it's like even he's tired, and he's exclaiming that on screen by doing the biggest shit stain possible. And as much as I tried to give this movie a chance, the more I thought about it while the credits rolled, the more I started to get upset. And again, I've had that exhaustive feeling by the end of the movie, and that's never a good sign. So I'm going to have to give Transformers The Last Knight a 5 out of 10. It's a 5 out of 10. I'm not even going to say low or high, because at that point it doesn't really matter. It's a 5 out of 10. That's not good. That's kind of a failing grade. And I think that's probably the first one I get. I think I even gave Agents of Extinction a slightly higher rating. I think I gave it like a 6 out of 10 or something like that. This is a 5 out of 10. Appropriately for the 5th movie. And I think it's time to let shit go. And I know that we got a Bumblebee spinoff in the works. Maybe that'll work under a different writer and director, but at this point, I don't know, because I'm starting to give up myself. maybe I'll continue to stick with the figures because I still love the figures. I still love how you're getting 3 figures in one, a robot, a vehicle, and a puzzle all in one, and I've always been a fan of that. But these movies, not so much anymore. At least not except for the first one. I still enjoy the first one, and I'll still hold to those words no matter what anybody says. So if you have seen Transformers The Last Night, please let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of the movie. Do you think it sucked? Do you think it sucked big hairy balls? Or do you think that it was okay, or passable, or even enjoyable as much as the other ones? Please let your voices be heard in the comments below. Make sure you like and share this video to support it, and also be sure to support the channel by hitting the subscribe button down below, and be sure to catch the Dark Spider David Show, a brand new podcast style type of show here on YouTube, at least twice a week. I'm still trying to figure out a scheduling type of thing because work and school coming up, as well as other social duties kind of starting to conflict with one another, and posting a show on the days that I always intend to, which is Tuesdays and Saturdays, is becoming a little bit of a hassle. So now I'm trying to figure out which days work best, and I'm trying to post at least 2 shows per week. So stay tuned for that, and you can do so by hitting the subscribe button down below so you do not miss out. And make sure you follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at DarkSpiderDavid. Until next time, guys, take care. Roll out of this franchise for good, because goddamn.